Hey guys, today we're going to take a look at the passive form of the verb, or what we would refer to in English as passive voice. Using passive form is another more polite way to express an action. In Japanese, a sentence is usually more polite when it is less direct. So what is passive voice? For example, let's take the sentence, "The dog ate my homework." This sentence is what we call an active sentence, whereas "the homework was eaten by the dog" is what we call a passive sentence. And we can usually tell if a sentence is active or passive simply by looking for the word by in English. It's not always the case, but it's definitely a good indication of whether a sentence is active or passive. So in Japanese, how do we make the passive form of the verb? As you're aware, there are three different types of verbs in Japanese. We have u verbs, ru verbs, and irregular verbs. So with u verbs, we're simply going to change the last syllable from an u sound to an a sound and then attach reru. For example, the verb kaku, which finishes with the ku sound, will now become kaka, which is an a sound. And then we attach reru. Kakareru. Underneath we have a few more examples. The first example here is the verb arao, to wash. And in this case, the u sound here changes from an u to a wa. So if your verb finishes with simply an u at the end, that u becomes wa. For example, arawareru. In our next example, we have the verb kiku, to listen. And again, that ku sound is going to change from an u to an a. Kikareru. Kikareru. The next verb we have is hanasu, to speak. And again, the su will change from an u to an a. Hanasareru. And finally, we have the verb yomu, to read. And the mu will change from an u to an a and become yomareru. Now with ru verbs, it's a little simpler. All we need to do is take the verb's stem and attach ra-reru. For example, deru becomes de-rareru. Miru becomes mi-rareru. So we've simply got our verb stem, and remember the stem is the part before mas, and we then attach rareru. Now our irregular verbs, there is only two of them, so we just need to remember these. We have kuru, which becomes korareru, and suru becomes sareru. Now please note the passive form of ru verbs looks the same as the potential form of the verb. Remember back we did a lesson about how to say that you can do something. For example, I can eat something is taberareru. So because the passive form of ru verbs looks the same as the potential form, how do you tell them apart? There's two ways. The first way would typically be the context of the sentence, and the second way would be to look at the particle that comes before the verb. If the particle is ga, for example, then we know that the verb is in its potential form. I can do something. Whereas if the particle that comes before the verb is ni, then we've got a pretty good indication that the verb is in its passive form. Now let's look at a few examples of how to use the passive form of the verb. Consider the following sentences. The dingo killed the sheep. This is an active sentence. Dingo wa hitsuji wo koroshimashita. So in this case, the doer of the action, the dingo, is the subject of the sentence. And the verb killed has an object, which is sheep. In the second example, we have our sentence in passive form. The sheep was killed by the dingo. So once again, we can see here in English that we've got this word by inserted into our sentence, which changes our sentence from active to passive. Hitsuji ga dingo ni korosaremashita. So our verb killed is now in its passive form. So in this case, the sheep is the subject, unlike in the first example where the dingo was the subject. And in this second example, there is no object, whereas in the first example, the sheep was the object. So the doer of the action, the dingo, is not the subject but the agent by which the action takes place. So he is the doer. The dingo is the doer of the action. Now, please note that in Japanese, the agent or the doer of the action, when mentioned in a passive sentence, is always followed by ni or niyotte. For example, this manga was written by the students of Aoyama High School. この漫画は青山高校の生徒によって書かれました。So in this case, the doer of the action, which is the students, is followed by ni yotte. However, there are many passive sentences which do not have an agent of the action. For example, in Japan, 30% of the books that are published are manga. 日本では出版される本の30%が漫画だ。So in this case, there's no agent, there's no doer of the action in this sentence. So that's about all for this topic, but if you have any questions or comments, please let me know.